Hey guys, it's Professor Cruz again. Welcome to Module 5, Consequential Ethical Theories. I just wanted to get on here and make a video to help you guys through this module like I've been doing. Some things I want to talk about with you today. I want to go over some general feedback for like last week's assignment that's, I think, applicable to the class as a whole. Then I'm going to show you this week's assignment, which is our continuation on the critical thinking application process. I'll show you the example format for this week's assignment. Then I have an example that I've worked out for you guys to show you what this application looks like. And then I want to go over, if you guys hang with me long enough, some content about the theory itself. And it's going to kind of explain some things about it for you that will help you make the connections to when you go to apply it for your case in general. Okay. So first and foremost, let's start with the general feedback. I think for the most part, we're kind of off to a good start. You guys all have, everybody who turned in your assignment, you've got feedback now. I want you to definitely go back and take a look at it. Everybody, every single person in class, so don't think you're excluded just because you like your grade that you got, has something that they need to fix or add or change before they go forward in the process. And that's fine. That's why we do it in multiple stages. But I just want to go over a few of the key things. If you remember my grading, I always say that if it's highlighted in yellow, that's something that I like or something that you've done well. If it's highlighted in green, that's like a technical thing I want to draw your attention to. And then all the purple stuff is my comments. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you might have some typed out commentary that didn't fit on the actual page itself. So I would definitely encourage you to look down that far and see if you have that. But as far as the highlighting goes, I was looking for 3 key things to be in place on last week's assignment. I wanted your central ethical issue question to be correct. And I think for the most part, we all did pretty well with that. I wanted to make sure your stakeholders were good and your options were good. So those are the 3 elements that I was highlighting in yellow. If it's highlighted in yellow, that means it's good. If one of those elements isn't highlighted in yellow, that means it needs to be changed and read my feedback. So if you're looking through and you see that like only 2 of your options are highlighted, that means the 2 that aren't highlighted need to be switched. And I've left feedback on how to do that or what I'm expecting, okay? Same thing with your question. Now, for the most part, everybody found good stakeholders, but you guys didn't find enough. Everybody has to add a stakeholder or 2 or more to their case. Some people did very good, but there's like these little ones sometimes that like sneak past us. So just go back to your list and make sure. Everybody, we got the obvious people. Obviously, we know there's Isaac. We know there's Ella. That's the couple. We got Emily and David. The kids. But remember, we want to pick out all the stakeholders, okay, that are involved in the case. And this is why I left instructions on how to expand your chart. And I told you you would need to expand your chart because there's also an aunt and an uncle that are called out by name. There's a doctor and 2 nurses that are called out by name. And then there's also the friends and family. So all those people should be stakeholders groups. Like you can do them separately, you can do them together, but they have to be separated out at least as much as that they have expressed like a different experience in this case to the other people. So if it were me, I would have at least as individual stakeholders, Isaac, Ella, Emily, David, Aunt Linda or whatever her name is, Uncle Sam. You could put the Dr. Patel and the 2 nurses together in one group, and then friends and family would be a group because these are all people that are called out by name. And having all these numbers accounted for is super important for this week's assignment because we're doing act utilitarianism, which is we're going to try to create the greatest amount of good or happiness for the greatest number of people involved. So we have to have a clear depiction of what the numbers are to know that we're actually hitting the greater good and not the greater good for the 4 randomly selected people we picked because it was never supposed to be the number 4 because some people picked the sister and not the brother or the uncle, not the aunt, not the uncle, et cetera, et cetera. How did we make these choices when we clearly knew there was more people? That's entering a bias into the process. We want all people accounted for. So I've left notes on your paper on how to change that and make sure you follow that as well. Likewise, when it comes to the options, people did very good at finding some of the options and some people just need a little work and that's fine. But when you have a question, something like, should Isaac tell his wife the truth? Well, the first two options are obvious, do the thing or don't do the thing, right? So one thing you can say, Isaac should tell Ella the truth, or Isaac should, hide the truth from his wife. But that's it as far as telling or doesn't telling goes. A lot of people, they kind of split hairs and they're like, well, he could tell her the truth and leave it at that, or he could tell her the truth and give her hope, or he could tell her a lie and give her hope. Like, it doesn't matter how you're telling her or not telling. You can't tell her twice and not tell her twice and just put little conditionality things on it because it's still telling her, right? And so the idea is he's either telling her or not. What are two other things that he can do? The idea is your first two options are always going to be obvious. Do the thing or don't do the thing. What are two things we can do outside the obvious that might be viable options to take in this case? All right. Yes, it's a little bit harder, but that's what we got to push ourselves to try to find. So if I've asked you to replace those, you need to replace them. You don't have to resubmit this assignment. You just go forward like you always have them and you put them on next week's chart because we're going to be using the same kind of chart. But you can email me before then and run them by me and see if they're good. But like I said, for the most part, don't take this as me beating you guys up. For the most part, it was really good. I think nearly everybody identified the question correctly. Everybody got good stakeholders. You just need to add a few. And most people nobody had like no options, but like some people just need to change an option or two to make it fit what we're doing. So we're in the right direction. We're just going to make some tweaks and then we're going to move forward so we can do this right. My biggest area of concern actually on last week's assignment was the lack of the amount of people who are actually like using the formatting. For all four of these assignments, I have provided for you formatting that just has to be downloaded and used. So there's a lot of people that didn't have double spacing, they didn't have title pages or the correct title page, they didn't have elements on the chart, they didn't have the rubric. These are all things that if you would have just downloaded the Word document that I provided for you, as the instructions ask you to do, that you would have just filled in with your content and you wouldn't have missed those points. I'm going to take points off every time for those, and I'm going to take off more points each time you miss it. So please, like, there's no point in that. I understand that the formatting can be tricky. That's why I've given it to you. And I'll let you know, man, for full disclosure, if you want to frustrate a professor, not just me, anybody, keep missing the easy stuff that they give you. You know what I mean? I mean, it's provided for you. There's no excuse not to turn it in when it's literally provided for you. What's concerning is people are going through the module and you're not clicking everything in the module to see what it is. You're just jumping right into the assignment, trying to do it. And it's not working out fully the way you would want it to. So please use the resources that are available there for you, okay? Now I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start kind of going through this week's stuff. So give me a second. All right. So as always, we've got the little checklist thing to follow through. We're gonna have my video in there. Obviously, it'll be the first thing once that's not there yet because it doesn't exist. The first thing you'll see is my video. Then we have the Chapter 5 Smart Book quiz. Now, the Smart Book quiz is due at the end of the week, so it's not due until March 24th. But I always recommend reading the chapter and doing the quiz first, because in the chapter, I think in particular, pages 24 and 25, it goes over this application process for you, shows the chart, shows the scale, shows all this different stuff you need to use. So you don't want the first time you're seeing that to be after you've turned in your assignment, right? Look at it beforehand, but you just have the week to do the quiz, but I'd recommend doing it first, okay? So read the Smart Book chapter, take the quiz, 26 concepts, 47 minutes. So make sure you plan your time accordingly. Then again, we have the supplementary videos. Hopefully you guys have been watching those. The faculty have great videos on there that kind of break down the content even more. Dave Monroe has some videos on there that kind of show the application process on top of the one that I'm going to show you here. So I'm just trying to hit you over the head with as much information as we can. So like, again, you're not feeling like you're doing this alone. I've put the case back in here if you want to refer to it instead of going back to last week's module. You can just pop it up here and look at it. I've got the sample format, which I'm going to come back to in a minute, because here's the Dropbox with the assignment, and I want to talk about that a little bit, okay? So now we're moving forward in our process. Remember, we had the 7-step critical thinking application process that we talked about in the last section. The first one was identification, research, and analysis. We did that last week. Now we're starting the application process, which we're going to break down into 2 different assignments in 2 different weeks. And then the last 3 parts, the decision-making, evaluation, reflection, will be our 4th assignment. So this is our first application, and it builds off of last week, and that's what we're saying. So I've noted here that you want to make any necessary revisions before moving forward with this assignment, meaning change them in this assignment and make sure you fix the things I've asked you to fix, because I'll deduct heavily this week if you don't change things I asked you to change. Because what I'm going to do when I go to grade this week's assignment, I'm going to pull up last week's feedback and I'm going to match them and make sure you did the things that I asked you to do, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to apply the consequential ethical theory of act utilitarianism. And so download that example that I'm going to show you in a minute and use that as you go, okay? So the first thing you want to do is you're going to I use the identification again, which is the 1 bold statement. This is where we restate our central ethical issue. So like, should Isaac tell Ella how bad her condition is? Whatever it is you put, it'll be in bold. Then we're going to have another chart. You'll see it because we're going to reuse last week's chart. The only difference is what's telling you here. Obviously, you're going to add the stakeholders I've asked you to add. You're going to change options if I ask you to change them. Then you're going to delete all that wording stuff that you put on there about how people feel, and we're going to replace that with net utility score. And we're even going to add another row at the bottom of the chart that says net utility. Okay, so I'll talk about that again in a second. Okay, and then again, like I said, page 24, page 25 is going to be helpful. Make sure you hit all these bullets, and then the last part, you're going to state your ethical issue. You're going to fill out the chart. And then once you get your decision that you're supposed to make through the chart, you're going to have a nice solid paragraph of at least 200 words where you're going to explain what the best act utilitarian option is for the case. And so you want to start this off by saying, now it says Bob here, and this gets a little frustrating because it says he's not your decision maker. If you've read the case, there is no Bob, but yet a couple people want to write Bob on there, and that shows just a severe lack of attention to detail. You don't have a Bob in your case. Bob is from my example. This is just a placeholder thing. Yours is Isaac, right? So you're going to start this paragraph by saying, if Isaac were an act utilitarian, he would, and then you fill in the full, wording of the option, that he should take. Okay, don't give me a half phrase. Don't tell me he should follow option 1. Write out what it is, et cetera, okay? So now what you're going to do, and this part's important, you're going to explain how this decision was identified as the best by using the major important key concepts from the theory. This means that you need to go to where the theory is explained in the textbook, and you need to pull out concepts that are key to the application process. You need to paraphrase those and cite those as you're going. So you'll say something like, according to blah, 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 which says this, that, or the other thing. An act utilitarian needs to do da, 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 Manus and Monroe, comma, 2022. In the in-text citation, Isaac does this by going blah, 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 right? So what you need to do is you need to show a firm understanding of the theory and how it's applied in relation to how you've come up with the option that you came up with. And it says here, the more depth, the better in this section. Don't just talk up your decision by comparing it to other options. Show how it is the right one for the theory. Now remember, broken clock is right twice a day. You need to demonstrate a strong knowledge of the theory such that you'll always be right when applying it. So I don't want to see that you lucked into the answer. I want to know that you worked the process the proper way and got the correct answer because of the process and not just because you pulled one out of the hat. How I know that is by you showing me that you understand the key concepts to the theory, how it's applied, and how that affirms your answer. Not that, oh, this answer is better than these other ones. I don't care about the comparison. I want to know why the theory says that this is a correct answer and how it fits in with the concepts. Don't just put one thing, one site and be like, there, got it. Because it's one thing to write 200 words. It's another thing to write 200 quality words. So really, please focus on what this paragraph's asking you to do and do it correctly. Okay, and then the submission checklist, I'm going to ask you guys to take better care to follow this through, because the majority of the class has multiple of these violations every time. We're writing in the second person you. Stop writing your papers to me. When you say, oh, is it right to do this to your wife and do that to your wife? You're talking about me. I'm not in this case. Isaac is. You see, so we shouldn't be writing in second person you ever in academic writing, because it just speaks directly to your reader, and we don't want to do that. There's no reason for you to be writing first person in this assignment. I, me, mine, we, myself, us, our. Again, you're not in this case. Isaac's in this case. Ella's in this case. You see, it has nothing to do with you or I. So these personal pronouns, first and second person, shouldn't be in here. We want to make sure we follow the APA standards. We've got a whole module for that. We want to make sure we're attaching the rubric. I'd say probably half the class didn't attach the rubric, and it's on the format. Some people still aren't using Microsoft Word document. We need to do that. When you can answer yes to all these questions, it's ready to turn in. It's not just on here for filler, like to make it look like, oh, look at all the instructions. He's put some depth into it. It's to show you what the expectations are. Each one of these things represents points that you're going to potentially lose if you haven't accounted for these things in your assignment. Okay. So please make sure you get them. Read over these assignments these instructions a couple times before you get started. And then I would even recommend comparing your assignment to these instructions when you're done. Okay. Now remember, the sample format here, please download this document and use it, fill in your information. Some people aren't using these and it's costing them points. I have the format for you right here. All you have to do is click this down caret, download it. Okay. And it pops up. Okay. And you put your name here. People are still leaving this name on there. This is Gambit. You are not Gambit. Okay. Put your name here. My name goes here. Okay. It's just a placeholder. Don't change the title or anything. It's already got the page number. So if you just use this, everything's going to look right. You just put your name here. You change the date. That's all you got to do. Okay. Then you're going to go here. And obviously you're just going to type your answer in here. You know, should Isaac, whatever you wrote, right? Tell Ella the truth, hide the truth from Ella, blah, 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 right? You're going to write that out there in bold. Okay. Your happiness scale needs to be on there. Leave it. It's already there. +10 to -10, right? That'll make sense when you read the chapter. And when we talk about this in a second, and then essentially I've got a chart here for you. You just got to fill it out. Okay. You expand the chart as needed to accommodate your stakeholders. It's only set up for 4 because it was just a placeholder, right? You see there's a new one here, net utility. Now these numbers here in the middle, they don't mean anything. Okay, they're just made up. I just have them in there to kind of show you what this is going to look like, because what you'll do now, yeah, I thought that had that in there. What you'll do now, you'll notice that there's a number in parentheses next to each stakeholder group. You have to put how many people are in each stakeholder group. So, you know, Isaac's going to be 1, Ella's going to be 1, the doctor and the 2 nurses will be 3. The friends and family, that's up to you. Pick a number that seems logical. How many friends and family members does he have? You put them in there, because what you need to do is once we get a utility score for the option, you have to multiply it by how many people are in there. So like you see stakeholder group 4 has got 12. So each of these numbers are multiplied by 12. Because remember, it's the greatest amount of good for the largest number of people involved. So the numbers, they have more sway than the singles. That's just kind of how utilitarianism is, right? And so when you do this, I was supposed to be at 2, that's why. When you do this, you got to show the math. Okay, if it's only one person, I won't make you show the math, because at this point, if you don't know that a number times 1 is itself, I don't know if I can help you with math, right? But if it's got more than one person in the group, show me the math so we can check it and make sure. After you get all the net utility scores for each stakeholder for each option, then what you do is you total it all up down the bottom. Okay. And then what happens is, act utilitarianism tells us whichever of these produces the highest net utility score is the option we take. Now, obviously, these are all fake, but whatever this would be would have been the option that we took, option 2, because it has a net utility score of 29, which is higher than 15 and certainly higher than -12 and -9. So whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if you like the option or not. Whatever has the highest net utility is what we take. One of the biggest problems that students do on this assignment is they introduce bias into the chart. They're not fair. When two people have like equal kind of stake in the case, they should be shown accordingly. So like the brother and the sister, really one doesn't override the other. The aunt and the uncle, really one doesn't override the other. And that's like the hint I'm going to give you, because I know that only a few of you are going to actually watch the video, so you guys will have the leg up. But at the end of the day, when I saw my face-to-face class, people like, you could tell the bias of like what side they wanted to win, because they would give the sister like maximum happiness and like maximum unhappiness when she gets what she wants or doesn't. And then the brother was like kind of neutral. Well, they're equal on opposite ends, right? Same thing with the aunt and the uncle. So if anything, they should kind of like negate each other a little bit. But that's what you want to consider, like what is the maximum happiness or unhappiness that the person is going to get from this option, and then multiply it. Now, right now, if it's seeming a little clumsy, don't worry. I'm going to show you like a real life example. I'm just trying to explain to you how the chart works. So you put all your decision makers down here, or your stakeholders down here, and you put all your options across the top. You can leave the options numbered, just highlight this part and put your option in there. Okay. You can expand this chart the same way you did before. If I've got more stakeholders, which I know you will, you go in here and you do a right click, just like we did. Insert, rows below, right click, insert, rows below, right click, insert, rows below, till you have enough. Keep filling it in. Notice I'm doing it between stakeholder 4 and net utility, because I want the net utility to be last. Okay, so I'm just going to keep filling these things in here till I get for as many stakeholders as I had. When this says, delete this from the final copy, delete this. People are still leaving that stuff in there. I'm going to take a point off if you do that, because it's attention to detail. So you fill out your chart, you find out what your highest net utility is, and then all you have to do is come here to decision, and you click in there and you type your paragraph. Okay. Then you're going to need references, because in this paragraph, you're going to be citing the textbook. So you need the full reference citation to the textbook. Okay. And if you need help with that still, see a librarian or a writing tutor, or, look at my feedback on your previous assignments to make sure you're getting this correct. And then the rubric is here. And so all you have to do is just leave that alone, because if it's not on there at this point, I've been taking 1 point off. Now I'm going to take 2 points off if there's no rubric. So if you just download my format and use it, everything's there for you. You just have to fill it in. Okay. That being said, let's talk about, what this looks like. So, what I've done here, if you remember my guy Bob, from the previous example, there was Bob and he had a wife. She has a boyfriend. George, the neighbor, told Bob that she was cheating, and there's Timmy, the son. So I've got all my stakeholders here. Now, in this case, it's going to be a very simplistic example, because there's only one each, but I still showed my ones. Okay. I've got my 4 options across the top. Remember, we said Bob could do nothing about his wife's cheating. Bob could divorce his wife. Bob could ask his wife to go to marriage counseling with him. Bob could separate from his wife. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here with 0 bias. Okay. And I'm going to think, what's the possible happiness outcome or unhappiness outcome for each of these options for these people. And I'm going to find the highest net utility, whatever it is. All right. Right now, you guys might be thinking that you know how you want your case to end up. I don't care. This week, you're an act utilitarian. You need to think about as an act utilitarian, and you need to produce an act utilitarian option. if you do not like that act utilitarian option, just hang tight. You might like the Kantian option next week because they are opposed to one another, the theories, okay? They are not supposed to agree, and no matter how many times I say it is not the goal for these to agree, students still try to make them agree. Oh, they agree, they agree. If they agree, it's purely coincidental, and you probably applied one of them incorrectly. One is a consequential theory, which we'll talk about in a minute, which means the actions don't matter, only the outcomes. The other is a non-consequential theory, which means the actions are what matters, not the outcome. So how can you have two things that are opposed? One is outcome-based and one's action-based, and how are they going to come together and agree? It's not the point. So this week you need to think like an act utilitarian. If you like the answer, great. If you don't like the answer, you just wait till next week and see what Kant says. And if you don't like the Kantian option either, then in the reflection you say, hey, I don't like either of these. Okay, you see what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, we got to follow the rules of the theory. Okay, so I got my chart, I've got my options, I've got my stakeholders, I've got the number of people listed. You need to do that or I'll take points off, right? Because we got to see how these numbers add up. And then what happens is I just have an example here just to go ahead and skip to it. We have that happiness scale across the top. So what I did is I went through and I gave a score to each one. So I think, okay, Bob could do nothing about his wife cheating. Well, that's probably the worst thing to happen to him. Now everybody wants to do these tens, fives, zeros. You got to remember, think -10 is the absolute worst possible outcome. +10 is the absolute best outcome. They all can't be -10s and +10s. There's got to be some variation. 0 means that that person's not affected at all by that option. Okay. You can have the spectrum all the way through. Just think it through. Be logical about it. So if Bob did nothing about his wife cheating, to me, that's a -10. This is the worst thing. He's still getting cheated on. Nothing's getting resolved. Mary's like a +5. She's not all the way happy, but she's not all the way unhappy because for her, status quo, life's going on as it was. Boyfriend, maybe he's a +8 because they don't have to sneak around as much. The neighbor's a +7 because he doesn't feel bad that he broke him up. Timmy's a +10 because he doesn't know any different and he's just still a young, happy kid who thinks his parents are in love. +20 for the net utility. You see, I took all the numbers, I added them all up, and what I got was a +20. Okay. Same thing. He could get a divorce. That's -8. It's still pretty unhappy, but he's probably going to be a little happier than just going through knowing he's getting cheated on, nothing's happening. So I gave a little more happy, but he's still in the negative because divorce, whether it's time to happen or not, it's not an easy thing, right? Mary, she's getting a -3 because even though she's the one who's been cheating, she's still going through a divorce, and that's going to be a hassle on her. The boyfriend, I made him just slightly happier now because he's getting closer to maybe having a relationship with Mary if that's what he wants. Now, George, I gave him a -7 because if them staying together makes him this happy, I kind of thought, what's the opposite? He's going to feel bad if they get divorced because he's the one who kind of, instigated this, even though he wasn't the cheater. I'm thinking this guy's probably going to feel bad. And then Timmy, of course, I mean, that's going to be life shattering for this kid when his parents get divorced and he's got, to pick who he's going to live with or go see mom, live with mom and only see dad on the weekends and fight over who gets Christmas Day. Like any children of divorce out there, you can relate with this, myself included. It's not a good situation, right? -19 is the net utility score of this one. Okay. And so Bob could ask his wife to go to counseling, +5. He's happy because they're working on it, but there's still that, I don't know if this is going to come through or not, or how it's going to end. Maybe +2 because while she's been cheating, maybe she's okay with trying to work it out. The boyfriend, -5 because if they reconcile, this gets closer to him not being able to have the relationship with Mary. George is a +5 because, hey, at least they're still together and they're working on it. Timmy, I said's a 0 because at this point he might not know anything's wrong yet, and he's not going to be necessarily happy nor sad. I didn't give him the +10 like life's great. Maybe he'll notice something's going on. Maybe he won't. I don't really know how he's going to be affected, so I went with a 0. Net utility here is +7. Okay. Bob could separate from his wife, -2. This one, he's still kind of unhappy because it's unresolved. I think it's probably would be the, happiest of all the negative options, but it's still a negative option to me. Maybe she's, still a little happy because still kind of living her life, but then this thing's still kind of dangling out there about how that's going to happen. Put the boyfriend back up around +8 because it's kind of the same here. He gets to do his thing. George, the neighbor, he's, probably still gonna be unhappy because they're split up, but not as unhappy as the divorce because maybe they'll get back together. Timmy's still pretty unhappy, but mom and dad are still together right now, so it's not as bad as the divorce. So I got a net utility of -3 on there. Now I know this seems kind of arbitrary, but remember, this is kind of like you thinking through logically the numbers. The numbers are going to be subjective to you, but it's kind of like when you go to the doctor, it means something as long as you're given the numbers, that pain scale, like how bad's it hurt, 1 to 10. And if every time you go to the doctor, you give the number, they can gauge like the value of that number based off of you. It's the same thing here. Yes, it's subjective to what you're giving in the number, but as long as you're giving all the numbers have meaning within themselves, as long as you're trying to be logical and thoughtful in the way in which you come up with these numbers. Okay, and so that's what this happiness scale is. We're taking, in each one, this is what we call net utility. This is where we take the possible happiness an option can do and the possible unhappiness or whatever it could create, and we subtract the two, and whatever's left is what we call net utility. Okay. And so we go with the highest net utility score, period. You cannot have a tie. Two different things cannot produce the same happiness. According to act utilitarianism, there should be one definitive correct answer that creates the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people involved, even at the expense of the decision maker. There is no concept of individual rights in act utilitarianism, and that throws people. The individual person does not matter. The collective is what's important. So as long as the majority of the people are happy, it doesn't matter what happens to that one singular person. Okay? This is consequential, so it's outcome only. We don't care about the actions. Okay, so I always kind of use an extreme example, but like I tell my students, like, if I got 40 people in the class and I say one was a serial killer and I execute him, as long as you guys believe that the execution was justified and you feel happy and that justice was served and you're actually now gonna not kill somebody, that net utility will override me executing that one person, even if they were innocent. An act utilitarian wouldn't care about executing an innocent person if it somehow created an overall happiness for the group. Okay? When you're testing these options, we're thinking about the outcome. Okay? So think about if the option's successful, what would the outcome produce? This throws people off too. If one of your options is Isaac lies to Ella, you have to think, what is the outcome of that lie if it's successful? Many times people will be like, oh, well, she'll be mad that she got lied to. Only if he gets caught. And I know that sounds weird in an ethics class, but the lie might work. And a lie for the good of the people isn't too bad, according to Plato. He called it the noble lie. So the outcome, if he lies and tells Ella she's going to beat this thing, she is going to be living knowing, hey, I'm going to beat this thing. I'm going to survive. If he tells her the truth and she knows she's going to die, which of those creates more happiness? I'm not going to tell you. I've walked you up to the answer as much as I will, but this is for you to decide. Remember, the lie, you got to operate on the assumption that it's successful. Otherwise, there was no point in putting it on there as an option. So if the lie works, what is the fallout for all the stakeholders? Make sense? And you do that with everything. What's the fallout for the truth? What's the fallout for, the lie? What's the fallout for options 3, 4, whatever else you came up with? Okay. And so that's what you do for this chart. Okay. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully it wasn't too murky, my explanation. You can watch this video as many times as you need to. It's also laid out for you in the chapter, page 25. Dave Monroe has a video in the faculty videos. There's a lot of different places you can see this, but hopefully you'll get the general idea of it, okay? Now, before I go, I want to show you one other thing just to kind of help further explain stuff. I want to talk a little bit about, the content of the chapter. to help you out so you'll better understand the application of this process. In this chapter, we're talking about consequential ethical theories, which I've mentioned a few minutes ago, and now I want to explain what those really are. So first, we have to start with a question: what are consequential ethical theories? These are theories that base morality on the results or the outcomes of behaviors, okay? The consequence. Now, we typically think of consequence as a negative word, but in this case, consequence could be good or bad. It's just what happens as a result, okay? So how do we evaluate actions? Well, our actions are going to either have a good or bad outcome. And that determines if it was a good or bad action. So if the outcome was bad, the action was bad. If the outcome was good, the action was good. It absolutely positively does not matter what the action is. As long as you produce a good outcome, it's a good action, and vice versa for bad. So does it matter what the action is? I just said no. Outcomes are all that matters. Period. Okay? It's very, black and white, hard line. I did this thing and it came out good, so what I did was good. I did this thing and it came out bad, so what I did was bad. This is often associated with the phrase, the ends justify the means. The ends are like a tool. I'm sorry, the end is the goal that you're trying to get to, and the means is the tool that you use to get there. So when you say somebody says the ends justify the means, that means the outcome justifies the actions that you did to get there, okay? So, I'll run through this real quick. And one of our theories is ethical egoism. This is not what we're applying this week, but this is just the view that people, ought to be selfish or at least self-interested. This isn't psychological egoism. It says we are selfish. But this says that the right action in any situation is the one that's in the individual's best long-term interest, and that altruism is possible, but pure altruism is immoral. Remember, altruism is that idea that we can unselfishly, act for the concern of others without any benefit for ourselves. Ethical egoists will say if we just did that forever, it wouldn't be good because we would never do anything we wanted. Some of the ones you'll see in the textbook, you can pause the screen and look at it if you want, but I'm not going to go through them because this isn't the assignment, but Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, Friedrich Nietzsche or however you say his name, Ayn Rand. These are some popular ethical egoists that you can learn more about in the chapter. Now, when you apply ethical egoism, this is important just because you'll see that one of your extra credit assignment is at the end of this application process, you can apply a third theory that aren't the two that we did for the assignments to the same case and see what that different outcome would be. And you can do that for extra credit. So you state the central ethical issue, which we've done. You list the possible options, which we've done. Then you will determine the most probable consequences of each option. Remember, just for the stakeholder, or the decision maker, because we don't care about the other stakeholders in ethical egoism because it's the long-term best self-interest, even at our own others' expense. You're going to apply the ethical egoist principle to choose the option that's in your best long-term interest. This is at the end of the theory in the chapter, but if you wind up wanting to do this for extra credit, this is the steps to apply it. What we're really concerned about this week is utilitarianism. And this is what we ought to do morally is produce the greatest possible utility for the greatest possible number. Utility is a word you hear a lot in philosophy, which means good. It also means happiness. If you hear utility, happiness, or good, it's all kind of the same thing, right? How do we determine this? The utility principle, which is the right action in any situation, is one that tends to produce the greatest possible balance of happiness over unhappiness for the greatest possible number. I know it's kind of wordy, but the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people is how you hear it described a lot. Utilitarians consider themselves harm reductionists. They're trying to reduce the amount of harm in the world by increasing the number of happiness. Now, I know that sounds a little crazy because I just said that I could kill somebody if it produced a greater good, and I could justify that. yes, there would still be more happiness in the world, and I would reduce harm in the world because I only harmed one person, and the other 39 people were happy. It's intense. I know some people will like this and some people won't, but like in an extreme sense, act utilitarianism could say you can enslave 10% of the world if you could guarantee maximum happiness for the other 90%, because the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people. So it resonates with some people, and some people they don't like the idea that there's not individual rights in it, and that's fine. It's why we're learning about 8 different theories. And if there was only one that everybody agreed on, it'd be called the way, and this is what that class would be. But this is the proper for the act utilitarianism, right? So act utilitarians, they say we apply this principle to every action we take, and that's why it can be kind of hard line. There's rule utilitarians, which is not the one we're applying this week. They say that we should use them as general, like this general principle to establish governing principles, rules, policies, that create like an aggregate good, okay, or happiness in the group. So it's different, but we're doing act utilitarianism because it's easier to deal with like those numbers and stuff, okay? So Jeremy Bentham, he's our, act utilitarian, so to speak. He talked about the principles of legislation and morals. He's the one who gave utilitarianism its name, even though elements of it have been around since the Greeks, okay? He advocated for changing laws of his day to create more happiness over unhappiness. He's the one who created our utility principle, okay? John Stuart Mill was like his godson or something like that. And he was another utilitarian. He was a leading philosopher in England. He served in Parliament. He advanced laws for social benefit. He was a radical feminist. He wrote a book on the subjugation of women. And so he would have leaned towards what we call rule utilitarianism. So act utilitarianism, this maintains the right thing to do in any situation is the action that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, how do act utilitarians figure this out? They use Bentham's utility principle we were just talking about. Pleasure is equated with satisfaction or happiness. We call that the hedonic calculus. Total pain and pleasure of the results of the action that people can take can be compared by a calculus. This is that net utility. Essentially, this is what our chart is doing. We are taking all the people involved in an option. We're taking all the happiness it creates. We're subtracting all the unhappiness that it creates, and then we're seeing what's left over for the net utility. Think net is after, right? What you make is your gross pay. The net pay is what you get after the government robs you, okay? Right? Takes out the taxes and all that other stuff, okay? Net utility is what's left happiness-wise when all the unhappiness is accounted for, okay? So when we apply act utilitarianism, this is what we're doing this week. We're going to state the central ethical issue, which is on the formatting. We're going to list the possible options that can be taken. So we've been working on our 4 options. We're going to list all the possible people affected by these options. Those are our stakeholders. And then we're going to determine the net utility of each option. That's the math that I showed in the box. And then we're going to choose and follow the option that produces the highest net utility. You'll see this at the end of the theory in the chapter as well. But in a sense, that's what we're doing this week. Don't get it confused with rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism, a lot of people like because it's a more modified version of utilitarianism that overcomes some of the problems of act utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism, one of the knocks on it is it doesn't create any hard, fast moral rules. You can lie, cheat, steal, as long as it produces a greater good. Like Kant's theory next week, he has perfect duties, things that you can never do, like lie, cheat, and steal. This is why these are different, options, because one's about the outcome and one's about the actions. Like stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family, an act utilitarian would be okay with. Stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family, a deontologist would not, because stealing is still stealing and it's bad, okay? So that's the difference in these kind of theories, right? So rule utilitarians, they kind of observe these guiding human actions. It's not just situational, decisions. It tells us additional rules that we can follow in society. And once we figure out those rules, we can use them to guide our actions. It kind of solves some of the moral absolute issues, but still bases the moral standing of rules on what makes people happy. And it attempts to reconcile the good ideas of act utilitarianism with the non-consequential insights about moral rules and absolute moral prescription. The reason why we're not doing this week is it's very similar to Kant's. In fact, I've argued that I think he kind of ripped off Immanuel Kant, because Kant came before John Stuart Mills, and John Stuart Mills even said that Kant made a difficult way to come up with net utility. So I think he was even nodding at the fact that his is like Immanuel Kant's. But what you do in a real utilitarianism, you're creating an aggregate good, an overall good and happiness. So all stakeholders get a little bit of benefit. And that's what you're trying to do. The difference is in act utilitarianism is there might be some stakeholders that are positively unhappy with the option. As long as there's more net utility, it doesn't matter. Okay. So just keep that in mind as you go. And so when we apply rule utilitarianism, you state the central ethical issue, you list the possible options that can be taken, you list the moral rules that would be relevant to each situation, you estimate the net utility to determine which more promotes social happiness, that's the aggregate good, and you eliminate rules that are likely to result in negative net utility, and choose the option most consistent with rules promoting social happiness. So again, this is one that you might apply in that extra credit if you wanted to. And again, you could find these at the end of the theory in the chapter. I just took that bulleted list and put it on here to show you guys. Okay. And so essentially that's our theories. So remember, when you get to your assignment, state the central ethical issue, fill in your options on the chart, fill in your stakeholders on the chart, figure out your net utility score for each option, then find the one that produces the highest net utility. That's your option that your decision maker should take, and then write a 200-word paragraph that says, if Isaac were an act utilitarian, he would, and then fill in, and then show through the theories, the concepts of the theory, how you got to this option and why it's the correct option. Okay. And as always, if you have any questions or anything for me throughout the week as you work on this, please feel free to email me. I'll be happy to give you any guidance and assistance. Don't sweat it too much. Don't overthink it. Just be fair, be objective, push aside personal bias, push aside the answer that you might want to be correct. Put all that aside and think like an act utilitarian. What produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people involved, even if it requires a sacrifice from the decision maker. Okay. So get this filled out, get it turned in on time. And then next week we'll apply Kant's deontology and we'll see what that theory says. And that'll get us one step closer to completing this project. Outside that, I hope you guys all have a great week. Study hard, work hard. Reach out to me if you need anything, okay? You guys have a good day.